have a serious problem. America is addicted to oil.
This is the last great source of oil on the planet.
Global warming, toxic sludge on a scale that's unprecedented anywhere in the world.
Each barrel that is produced here in North America among friends is one less barrel from the Middle East.
Hello and welcome. Could the huge supply of oil soaked into Canadian soil be the answer to the world's energy needs? It's a very controversial question that's led to an intense and growing debate and inspired the documentary, the start of which you just saw. Tar Sands Canada for Sale explores the argument surrounding Alberta province's bitumen, as it's sometimes called, which places Canada as potentially the world's second largest source of oil, just behind Saudi Arabia. The issue raised by the critics is the costs and environmental damage caused by the extraction process, while its proponents say tar sand oil secures our future and that cleaner technologies are being developed to extract it. In the middle of all this are the native First Nation tribes who are legally challenging the project, claiming they suffer from the environmental damage with toxic wastes infiltrating their water supply. A huge boomtown, Fort McMurray, has sprung up in northern Alberta to service the project, employing some 30,000 workers from all over the world, in what's become Canada's second fastest growing city. Well, the United States likes the convenience and stability of having a huge oil supply on its doorstep, but investors from Norway and China are also interested in getting a piece of the tar sands, while some Canadians feel they're giving away too much of their precious non-renewable resources too fast and too soon. On today's show, we look at the Alberta tar sands project and ask, are the high financial and environmental costs of extraction worth the price of oil security? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. Log on to livestation.com/AJE, enter the chat room and you can take part. And we'll also welcome your phone calls onto the show. Joining me for the discussion is Paul Michael Wiebe, a Canadian-American oil consultant and university lecturer specializing in the geopolitics of strategic resources. He also just authored The Rise of the New Oil Order. And I welcome you very much to the show.
Thank you, Rhys. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good to have you, sir. Now, you see this as a major way to solve the energy issues that face countries such as the United States, China, some of the big consumers. What do you see as the main reason for this?
It's a massive supply of oil. It's an extra heavy oil that is sometimes referred to as bitumen, tar sands, or oil sands, which I prefer to use. And it's a supply that is easily extractable with current new technologies that have come online over the last 10 years. Now, this particular extra heavy oil is processed through upgraders and refineries and is shipped primarily to the United States and, of course, Canada as well. It's a massive proven supply, and that's a key word, proven. In other words, the oil is definitely there. It's not subject to question. The discovery or exploration costs are minimal or nil, and that's the largest cost factor involved in oil exploration and production. So this massive amount, which is approximately two-thirds of Saudi Arabia's reserve numbers of around 260 billion barrels, is an extraordinary resource. And both the United States, China, and other countries, such as Norway, as you mentioned earlier, are very interested in the supply because it's a very secure supply.
I know, I'm watching the documentary, there are huge numbers mentioned here, you know, potential for 11 million barrels of oil a day for the next century, I think is the figure quoted. And yet the story is so much out of the limelight when everyone's discussing other alternative energy sources. Now, when it comes down to it, how do you regard the key arguments that people put forward against it? The high extraction costs, I mean, the exploration may be low cost, but the high extraction and then also the environmental damage caused.
Well, those are two very relevant questions. In terms of cost, one has to keep in mind that apart from the minimal amount involved in exploration and discovery, there's a minimal amount involved in transportation because it's part of an integrated energy system in North America, and you simply ship the crude by pipeline. It's not as if one were shipping by tanker, and those costs are added on. Plus, the risk premium in terms of insurance and security requirements are negligible as well. So yes, you have extraction costs, but those extraction costs have been reduced significantly over time because of technology. And right now, you can get oil sands out at a profit at approximately $40 to $50 a barrel. So we anticipate that prices will remain above the $50 mark for some time to come. And as a consequence, those oil sands projects will go forward at a profit to the investors and the companies involved in oil sands. Now, in terms of the environment, there are very legitimate questions relating to that issue, as they relate to any oil project in the world. And the government of Alberta, in my opinion, has been very active, very proactive in bringing together a number of projects to minimize environmental degradation and damage in terms of water, air quality, and so forth. And I think that your audience, your viewership, will be able to ascertain for themselves how actively involved the government of Alberta has been by simply going to government of Alberta websites and looking at the data and the amounts of money that the provincial government is spending to deal with CO2 emissions in particular. And just to give you a figure, just in the past few months, the government of Alberta has committed $2 billion to deal with CO2 emissions. That's an extraordinary amount. And it's probably the largest amount by any jurisdiction in the world to clean up CO2 emissions. So I think they've been very responsible.
Now, I know you travel the world. You're in DC advocating and advising on this issue. To what extent do you find that the issue of this fuel source is being driven more by geopolitics? I mean, for example, we have, as we said, China very keen to get in there, Norway, maybe other countries as well, as you mentioned. To what extent is America being pressured by the fact other people are knocking at the door?
Well, I think geopolitics is a real key. Geopolitics is a real driver in terms of prices. It's a real driver in terms of determining investment flows to secure the necessary supply to meet demand, not just in the United States, which, as you know, is the largest consumer of petroleum goods and products, but also the rising Asian markets. And so I think that what we see in the oil sands is a security of supply issue that makes it value added in terms of investment flows. And it's extraordinary for the government of Alberta to have this resource. Now, the ability to extract this, as you indicated, to a level up to 11 million barrels a day will be subject to new technological discoveries, which are ongoing as we speak, and pricing as well. But I think one can draw a very positive perspective on the future of this particular resource. Yeah.
What risks do you think the U.S. sees from having China in its backyard, so to speak?
Well, I think there will be some voices who would oppose Chinese involvement in the oil sands as a consequence of perceived rivalry between the two countries and the need to secure supplies to meet the needs of the two dominant economies in the world. However, having said that, I think there's a stronger argument to be made that it's in the interest of the United States to work out a cooperative and collaborative understanding with China to share in this abundance of oil supply. And when we speak of an abundance of oil supply, it's not simply the amount of oil in the oil sands. There are very significant supplies of conventional and unconventional oil in other parts of Western Canada, such as Saskatchewan and British Columbia. And here within the United States, we have very significant domestic supplies of unconventional oil sands and oil shale. So the point I make in the book is that we have this new oil order or new oil system that has arisen over the last several years, whereby there's an abundance of petroleum supplies around the world, not just oil, but LNG, natural gas, coal bed methane, and other supplies that can feed the growing demands of economies in Asia and elsewhere.
Aren't you in a difficult position in a way that you advocate for hydrocarbon fuels when the majority of the world movement, if you like, is just trying to wean itself off such fuels and trying to go to new clean energy sources, as they're often called? Well,
you know, it may be counterintuitive at this point to speak to the significance of carbon-based fuels, coal and natural gas and oil and so forth. But I believe that over time, over the next couple of years, the United States particularly will receive a healthy dollop of realism when it comes to the issue of energy supplies. As a matter of fact, one of the big supporters of wind and solar power, one of the alternative renewable energy systems that have been advocated very strongly by the environmental movement, T. Boone Pickens, the Texas billionaire, has been advocating strongly for solar and wind power. And just about a week ago, he admitted that it was not any longer feasible for him to promote that concept, and he was moving over to support natural gas. It's very difficult because of cost, because of infrastructure requirement, transmission lines, to get these alternative energies up and running in any period of 5 to 10 years. The realistic, in my opinion, the realistic view of things that we still will need hydrocarbons as a primary source of fuel and energy for the next 50 years. But there's no doubt there is a market for solar, there's a market for wind and nuclear.
Isn't though the supply of oil sands a disincentive for people to try to accelerate the investment into these renewable energy sources if they know, well, we've got this now, phew, we're safe?
Yeah, well, that's, again, the market dictates on this situation. And the market will dictate the cost of these competing energy sources. And in my opinion, because we do have an abundance of supply, oil derived from the oil sands or conventional oil as from the Persian Gulf and other areas will be relatively low over the next several years. We may see prices move up to $100 a barrel, but relative to the strength of economies and consumption that will be required, that's still a relatively inexpensive amount to pay for a price of a barrel of oil. So investors will look at where they can obtain the best return. And I think hydrocarbons, again, coal, natural gas, and oil will supply that requirement.
What progress has there been made on the cleaner extraction techniques? You're saying that that it could get up to $11 million barrels a day, dependent on developments. Now, presumably that also includes the idea of cleaner extraction techniques.
Yes, absolutely, and that's what's very exciting about this. And my firm, G West, advocates. Obviously, we have clients who produce clean technologies for the petroleum sector, and that's the future, obviously. In terms of your question, which is exceedingly relevant, most of the oil extraction in the oil sands in Alberta is not done from mining, open pit mining, which most people are familiar with. That's about 20%. 80% of the extraction comes from technologies where essentially steam-driven drilling into the ground with very little damage to the surface area secures the oil sands or the bitumen to the surface using steam and combustion and other techniques. Now these are becoming much more sophisticated. Now we even see microbe technology that will extract extraordinarily large amounts of oil from these sand deposits and other types of deposits. So technology, I think, is the answer, and we see it moving at a rapid pace, and I think over the next 10 to 15 years, many of the issues that environmentalists are pointing to will be treated in a manner that meets their requirements.
We'll touch more on that in a moment. We're going to take a very short break here. When we get back, we'll also talk with Andrew Nikiforuk, who's the investigative journalist and author of the book Tar Sands, Dirty Oil and the Future of a Continent, which has inspired that documentary Tar Sands that you saw excerpts of. As we pause, let me remind you, you can join the conversation with your questions and comments by logging on to livestation.com and entering the chat room. You can see there's a debate taking place in there right now, along with a poll we're conducting, where we're asking, how should Canada deal with the tar sands? Tell us what you think. You'll find the options there in the chat room. We'll be right back with the results.